Hello and welcome to the Adapt with Danette F-M podcast. I'm Danette Fenton-Menzies and we're now in season 2 of our podcast. We're looking at collaboration and problem solving. Now today's guest I'm very excited to be speaking to, which is Colin Ellis. But before then, I'd like to introduce Jez. Jez, welcome to the conversation.
Hello everybody, I'm Jez, I'm the podcast producer here, and I'm very excited to be co-producing this podcast with you, Danette. This is a companion podcast to Danette's book, The Adaptable Leader, and we'll get into that more later on the episode, but I highly recommend looking into this. So this book was fantastic, and we're going to really break down a lot of the adaptability skills that you sort of talk about in there. But before we get to that, people might be listening to this and going, who are you two? So Danette, do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself?
So I have run businesses for the last 26 years. I'm the author of The Adaptable Leader, which is why we're doing this podcast. And I've just learnt over the years of coaching and working with executives that a lot of them struggle to adapt during uncertainty. And so I want to help people successfully navigate through uncertainty. So, that's a little bit about me. How about you, Jez?
Yes, well, I am your son. I'm also the podcast producer here, and I do a bit of podcast production myself, but I also do a bit of comedy on the side. I've written for TV shows and in the comedy field as well, especially news stuff, and I do want to highlight that because we're about to jump into a new segment and a news segment. So that's very exciting. But together, we're using Danette's sort of lens of adaptability to look at sort of key problems, and you not only look at them yourself, but we also bring in experts to talk about different sort of elements. And today is Colin Ellis. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you met Colin? Because Colin's an awesome guy. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So Colin was my mentor in a program called Thought Leaders, and he's just extraordinary the way he looks at the world. He's an expert in culture and he works with some extraordinary clients across the globe. So when I was thinking about collaboration and problem solving, he was one of the first people that came to my mind that I wanted to get on the podcast.
Yeah, and he's awesome. We've had him on the Magical Learning podcast. He is, I think, the two best words that describe him are great value.
Yes.
You know, you always have a great time with him, and he's always a fantastic hang. But I did mention a news segment and a new segment. So, Danette, are you excited for our new news segment?
Super excited because it shows our adaptability, Jez.
Very much so. Well, here it is.
Love that intro.
Alrighty. So this is Adapt the News. Basically what this is each week we're going to be looking at a news story that was current at the time of recording. And luckily for those listening today, it's today. So it's a very current news story. Sometimes we're going to record weeks in advance. That'll be, slightly odd, but we try and keep things that'll be relevant. But today, I wanted to talk about something interesting because I saw this news story pop up on my feed and I thought I would talk to you about it because it does look at adaptability. So for people wondering, this is from the ABC and the headline is Older Australians Head Back to University for a Career Change Before Retirement. And basically what this story looks at is that there's currently 1.3% of Australian students are aged between 55 and 74. Now, that's interesting because they're looking at a new career sort of in the second half of their actual career. So I thought this was very interesting. I'm very impressed with the older generations wanting to come back and get some hex like the rest of us young ones. But Danette, what does this story mean to you? And looking at this through an adaptable lens, really what the point of this segment is, taking news stories and give us your adaptable insight into it. So over to you, Danette.
Love it, Jez. And love this story. So one of the things that historically we had a story about, you get to a certain age and then you retire. And what this is saying is, one, that most people now are not going to have just one career. They'll probably have multiple. And we're starting to see it with this age group where they're going, you know what, I could be more than what I've currently been. And I want to do that for fulfillment, for career, in order to move forward in a different way and learn different things. So I love that people are not going, my age is an excuse not to grow myself. They're actually adapting and going, I need to adapt myself. And in fact, I love the idea that everything in our brain comes from, and everything we create in our life comes from what we learn and what we navigate through life. And so when we add new skills to who we are, it actually gives us more opportunities, one, to move forward in a different manner. It also gives us different perspectives. So I trained originally as in accounting. I did my master's and did things like government, policy and stuff like that. So it gave me another lens to look at problems and to think about how I collaborate with other people. I also did a bit of marketing, which was definitely not a background of mine. So I'm loving that it's showing that there is the possibility, and in fact, I think for everyone, everything you literally create comes from your knowledge. So the more you invest in yourself, your learning, your growth, whether it's going back to university, doing an online course, going to TAFE, all of those help us learn different ways of looking at the world, which help us to adapt much better. And I don't ever want to retire. So for some of these people, they might be doing it because actually they want to give back and put more service into their community, or they just might want to continue to grow. So I think even having a conversation about maybe some of us don't even want to retire will be fun as well, because that potentially requires us to remain adaptable always.
Yeah, absolutely. And, actually, I was thinking about this last night as I was going to bed. So this is not a fully fleshed out idea, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Danette. So I was thinking about sort of the world in which we live in, and I think that in some ways, a way to look at it might be that what you can try and go for is, what is the easiest way I can make money in some ways, but that's going to be different for everybody.
Yes.
For me, that may be like, I may find it harder to work on certain types of problems. So that instantly makes that not easy for me, whereas it may be easy for others.
Yes.
And that can also look like investing in something, a job at the moment, so that it will make it easier to make money in the future for you. Love and stuff
that.
Like that. But I think with these people as well, I think they're kind of realizing that to some degree, and they're going, you know what, I want to make money in an easier way. This isn't what I want to do. It's too hard on me. And, whatever matrix you kind of want to use, whether it's, energy spent, time traveled, whatever is making this job difficult, let me get something that's going to be a little easier so that I can still make that money, but enjoy it in a more easy way.
I like that. And, there's a great question which comes from, I think it's the book called The One Thing. And he always says when we're changing, we often make problems harder because our brain just expects them to be harder. So I really like your focus on the easier, because his question was, how do I make this easier? And I love in that story also that part of change, and this is definitely a formula that I use in the book, is change equals uncomfortable equals growth. And a number of them didn't do their studies earlier in their life because they had stories in their brain that was like, I'm not smart enough, etc. I can't afford this, etc. And now they're sort of growing into their persona or their person of, this is what interests me. And therefore, when it interests you, it becomes easier often as you learn and grow. And sometimes the learning will be uncomfortable. And I always go, when you're uncomfortable, do a bit of a party dance, because you're actually growing and adapting. So I think there's the easy, pick something that you love doing or you think you might, and then know that sometimes it'll also be uncomfortable. But I love that idea, Jez, that you've got around that.
And I was just actually, this is conversation's gone on a totally different tangent, but I think we should just keep going because it's interesting. Nice. One thing that I was thinking about the other day, or I heard the other day actually, is that the difference between people with good self-confidence and bad self-confidence, this is just coming off what you were just talking about actually, so that's what reminded me, is basically the difference is just your internal voice, it seems like. This is what someone was suggesting as a theory. So, and you were talking about changing your story just then with people going into new roles, studying new things. Do you know, Danette, I guess just before we get into everything, and we're going to be talking about good work culture with Colin Ellis, so this is kind of important in that, but I guess, Danette, for you, is there an interesting way to change that internal voice, maybe from negative to positive, so you can give yourself this more confidence, or even change your own story like these people are doing? Yep.
So last week I was talking to a group, and I was talking about, and it's attributed to the Cherokee people, and it was a grandfather talking to his grandson, and the grandfather was explaining that we all have internal battles, and he referred to it as the good wolf, who is about hope and joy and all of those positive things and contribution and things like that. And the bad wolf is around things like your ego, comparison, anger, frustration, etc. And the grandson asked, which wolf wins inside? And the grandfather said, whichever one you feed the most. And I really like that, because we can change those internal voices. We can go, first of all, you have to become aware. So you have to go, oh, is that thought actually helping me move forward, feel more confident, etc.? Or do I need to pattern interrupt it? And so a pattern interrupt could be the moment you notice your brain going, I'm not smart enough to do this. You could go, yet. Because I love that. That came from Carol Dweck, who talks about a fixed versus a growth mindset. And she said people with growth mindset say, I haven't achieved this yet, or I haven't got this yet. So I like the yet in there. And then saying, and I can do this. And you can work with others to do it. And just mostly go, you've got this. Because when you start to go, I've got this, you'll take action, and really confidence comes from action and learning from our results. We won't always get it right, and if we learn from it, then that's a valuable thing. My biggest lessons where I've learnt so much value were my big stuff-ups, basically, or failures, or something that happened in our business that was outside of our control but helped me make the business stronger after that. So I love that sort of, yes, we can change it. And imagine if everyone just upped their self-confidence, maybe even 10%. So they spent more time in that joy, that happiness, feeling like they're contributing to the world. What the positive ripple impacts of that would be, not just in the workplace, but in their families, in their communities, because they're not playing small, which is what our ego wants us to do, which is the bad wolf, because it's trying to protect us from not stuffing up. But actually growth comes with stuff up, and it's just part of the learning process. And as you navigate that and move forward, you actually become more self-confident. So I hope that helped, Jez.
Absolutely. I mean, what a great conversation. What a good first segment of Adapt the News. Great job, Danette. Well, that was great. Let's jump into, we're about to jump into our conversation with Colin D. Ellis. And I was wondering, we'll save a lot of our thoughts for the end of this because people are going to love this conversation. But did you have any sort of things that you want people to keep an eye out for in the conversation? Yeah,
I love one of Colin's insights. So as a culture expert, he talks about what silos mean in an organisation. Now, I'm going to use this as a teaser, so people will have to listen to find out his distinction around silos in organisations. And at one stage, he talks about leaders and cultures and how, if we don't do this well, it can lead to culture trauma. And so, again, a really interesting insight about why it is so important for leaders to be able to lead well through both collaboration and problem solving to allow their organisation and their people to be able to adapt better. What about you, Jez? Any insights from you before we go in?
Well, I'm just going to keep people their eyes open. I'm going to keep people's eyes to being wise, because he has a phrase about 5 whys. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Love it.
We'll see. So anyway, everybody, enjoy this conversation between Danette and Colin D. Ellis.
Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Adapt with Danette FM. I'm Danette Fenton-Menzies, or Danette FM. And in this season, we're talking about collaboration and problem solving. And I'd love to introduce my guest today, Colin Ellis. Now, Colin, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience and our viewers, because we have both video and audio, to tell them a little bit about yourself before we start talking about the topic.
Hello, Danette. Thank you for having me on the show. Yes,
Pleasure.
I'm Colin Ellis. I help organizations around the world to create vibrant workplace cultures. I'm a 4-time best-selling author, an award-winning speaker. I really like to understand the challenges that organizations face, both large and small, and really help them to kind of come up with the root causes of why they do what they do and then help them to fix that.
Nice. And Colin also is my mentor. So very, very, very blessed. So I'm very excited to be on this podcast. So let's start with my first question, which is, what have you seen or experienced that helps you with Collaboration and or problem solving.
Well, let's start with collaboration, Danette,
Nice.
because what I see a lot in my work is the fact that collaboration doesn't really work, and I think many people listening to this will attest to the fact that collaboration is a word that organizations use a lot, but there are often barriers. You end up talking about silos, which are kind of broken subcultures within organizations. And I think really, when you look at the challenges that people face, it comes down to the fact that we're just not very good at setting up our teams, or we're not very good at setting up our organizations in a way where we really understand, well, how do we collaborate as human beings? And more often than not, what we end up doing is bringing a group of people together, throwing them at a problem, and kind of keeping our fingers crossed that they'll figure it out on their own. And then it all becomes a little bit panicked, a little bit last minute, and we end up kind of immediately going to a solution rather than taking the time to work as a team. And so I go, well, what options do we have, and what's the right way to fix this? And so I think there are a number of different things, so many things that we could talk about with regards to collaboration today.
Yep.
But I don't think organizations aren't great at teaching managers how to set teams up to collaborate, which then affects the issue that we have is often we don't solve the problem and we keep making the same mistakes over and over again, which is something that you'll see as well.
Yes, totally. So then let's start at the poor end of the scale. And I'd love for you to share, and you don't have to share the organisation, but an example you've seen of poor collaboration and or problem solving, and particularly what were the impacts because they didn't get it right?
Okay. All right, let's use a government agency, and I definitely won't name who they are. And so what you had was a failure to deliver outputs on time.
Mm-hmm.
And so these outputs could range from a key project milestone to a report. Essentially, they weren't getting through the work. And there was an exasperation from senior management as to why that wasn't happening. And one of the root causes, and I still in my work, you're talking about problem solving, I still in my work apply the 5 whys. And for those people who aren't familiar with the 5 whys, Takeshi Toyoda, in Toyota, he's one of the foremost Japanese innovators, kind of ask the question, why 5 times until you get to the real root cause. Yes. And the root cause of this particular issue was the fact that priorities weren't clear in this government agency.
Yep.
And so what you had was lots of different people working on lots of different things because they were being told lots of different stories about what was important versus what wasn't important. And every member of the senior leadership team had a different view on what was the priority. And so what that did then, Danette, is at the coalface, people doing the real work, they were kind of running around and there was lots of personality clashes saying, oh, this is the most important thing. Oh, we've got to do this. Oh, no, we've got to do this. And so what ended up happening was everybody was working on their own slice of something without actually, kind of conversing with other people.
Yep.
Because everybody had a slightly different agenda, a slightly different manner. Everyone kind of knew what the priorities were, but not really. And so you had this sandpaper effect where people were rubbing up against each other. There was heaps and heaps of friction, and nothing was really getting sorted out. And then it came back to the senior leaders and they said, oh, well, we've got lots of silos. And actually it was kind of poor decision making around the priorities that was actually causing those silos to occur.
Yep. A great example.
Yeah. All too frequent. And I think so just on the concept of silos, it's something that we talk a lot about, and the silos can be very good when you need deep work on a specific thing and only a group of people can do it. We use it in a negative context. Essentially, silos are broken subcultures. Each organization culture is broken up into a multitude of subcultures. And when those subcultures don't work well together, we call them silos. And what organizations really need to do is to mitigate the risk of silos by teaching managers how to build great cultures in the same way. So you don't get this different approach to building teams. You get this joined up view of this is how we build teams. This is how we work together. This is how we communicate. And this is how we stay focused on what we need to get delivered.
Nice, nice. And I love that link to culture. And I also love that you just put in the bit about silos where sometimes they are appropriate because we need to go deep on something with a group of people. But most of the time, I like that they're broken subcultures. That's a really good way for our listeners and viewers to think of them. So then that goes sort of into our next bit, which, and Jez added to this particular question, but based on your experience, what tips do you have for others, including young people who might be starting out, around developing their problem solving and collaboration skills, particularly with your culture background? I'd be really curious about that.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I'm saying to the generations coming into the workforce right now is don't accept the status quo is the right way to do things.
Yep.
There are so many inefficiencies in our organizations at the minute, Danette. What we want is new generations to come into the workforce. I mean, we want all generations to question it anyway, but
Yes.
but I think that the newer generations who are less wedded to the status quo and who have new ideas, I want them to challenge the ways that some of the things get done. You know, we're so inefficient in the way that we use technology in our organizations for the most part. You know, if you're a knowledge worker, your days are still dominated by meetings and emails, which is an absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that would be the first thing that I would say is,
Nice.
yeah, kind of make sure you challenge the status quo in a highly emotionally intelligent way, and recognize that you're going to come up against brick walls. It's in some people's best interest to maintain the status quo, even if it is inefficient. The second thing that I would do, which is kind of aligned to the first one, is to actually make time to problem solve.
Mm,
What you'll find, particularly younger generations coming into the workforce, is what you'll find is you're really, really time poor.
yes.
There are so many demands on your time, most of which is low value work, again, based on poor decisions. I think, what you want to do is to really carve out some time in your day to actually sit and think about issues that you're facing, problems that you have. I think the problem definition piece often is kind of overlooked, and I gave that, sense of the five whys.
Yes.
But too often when we're trying to solve a problem, we don't take the time to get everybody on the same page as to what the actual problem is. And then
Yes.
what happens is you get this fanning out effect where everybody goes and tries to solve different root causes when actually there's just one root cause. Also, what we get is we get this intentional or unintentional bias coming in based on what people think is the right way to solve it. So I think, for me, a couple of things there, Danette, is firstly, kind of don't just accept the status quo is the right way to do things. And secondly, really take the time to understand what the problem is, define it really clearly. If you have more than one problem, make sure each is defined and each is addressed. We're too quick to jump to the solution. And to a degree, it speaks to the world that we're in right now. Danette, I think what AI will do in the short term is generate laziness,
Mm,
because people will go and seek the answer rather than developing the skills so that they can spot the root cause in the
yes.
future. I was
Yep.
joking with my brother about it the other day. He loves Microsoft Copilot. I'm like, but if the Copilot does everything that it learns every question that you have, then eventually it'll be able to do your job. Is that what you want? He never really thought of it like that before. It was a bit of a wake-up call to it. But it will generate this laziness. And I'm not saying don't be curious about AI, but you have got a brain yourself, and actually you will have been trained or you've got some knowledge that you can use. So I think it will generate some short-term laziness. So really take the time to think about stuff yourself and work with others to identify what the root cause is before you go solve it.
I love that. And I was talking to my niece, so she's out from the US at the moment, and she was saying they use AI at school now. So she's in year 10, I think. And yeah, it's just part of how they learn now. And I was like, the same thing. It's good to understand the fundamentals before you sort of go and use things. And there's been many a workplace I've worked in where the problems they've solved were not the right problems because they didn't
Yeah.
take that time. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
love
that's
that.
absolutely right. And what you end up doing then, Danette, is getting stuck in a cycle of never fixing the problem. As you will imagine, I work with lots of workplace cultures where there's a level of toxicity, right?
Yes.
And the root cause of the problem is usually, when you do the 5 whys, is usually a senior manager who behaves really poorly.
Yes.
And so many people walk past that problem without ever solving it. And I refuse to work with that. I refuse. That sounds really bad.
No, it's good.
I had lots of conversations with a government agency in New Zealand about helping them with their culture. The root cause of their issues was the CEO,
Yeah.
and his behaviors were appalling. And I said, I can't conscionably take your money unless you're prepared to actually address
Yeah.
the root cause, which is that individual. And that's that cycle that we talked about, where people just get stuck going round and round and round. It's encouraging to hear that your niece is using in AI in schools, because I think that's one of the issues we have with technology, is we don't teach kids responsible use. And
Yes.
I include parents in that as well. One of the biggest challenges we've got, my wife and I, as parents of teenagers, is how do we teach them how to use it responsibly
Yes.
when the world, is dragging their attention and stealing their attention on things that just don't matter?
Yeah, yeah. And even, on the theme of this, the collaboration and problem solving, a lot of people think it's either or, it's a person or AI. And it's actually, we can collaborate well, understanding, how to do it well, rather than, oh, okay, we'll just give AI and it can solve all the problems for us. And it's like, no, 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 we need to collaborate. We need to work together. And as you said, solve the right problems. Rather than the wrong one. And I was going to say,
Yeah.
when you started to say the culture thing, I was like, my experiences many, many times, it is someone in senior leadership who is, people just don't want to address that, because it requires, difficult conversations, and organisations sometimes aren't that great at that, which makes then collaboration problem solving pretty hard too.
Yeah, that's right. And I think in those kind of instances, what you're left with is this almost this residue of cultural trauma
Yes.
that needs to be addressed. And unless it's addressed, it will continue to be a barrier, because people will say, and listeners will recognize this, oh, it's just like the ABC project all over again. It's just like the CDE project all over again. Is that, the trauma really has to be mended. We have to do a period. We have to go through a period of really understanding, well, what was the problem? How did we solve it? What did we learn? And I think it just ironically, I mentioned ABC, but the Australian Broadcasting Corporation has been in the news recently around toxic culture, and actually it sacked 2 of its senior members of staff, which I 100% applaud. You absolutely don't want to keep those people in there. But then what it really needs to do now is to do something different, to
Yes.
re-energize its culture, to make sure that that problem never arises again, or else, or people feel that they're empowered enough and trusted enough to speak up when they do see it.
Yes.
Danette, yeah. And
Yeah.
and what that does then, collaboration is one of the 6 pillars of culture. It really gives rise to people who want to work together. They feel that sense of intrinsic motivation. They
Yes.
recognize what's gone before, but they also see that things have changed, and they want to be part of the future, not stay rooted in the past.
Love that. So that then leads to the next great question, which is, what's your favorite example of collaboration and problem solving, and why?
Well, for those who don't know my background, I was an employee myself for 30 years, Danette. My first managerial job came for year 2000, which anybody younger will have to Google.
Yep.
Y2K was the millennium bug, and people say it was a red herring. It wasn't. I was a project manager. People like us save the world, but that's fine. It, we So the problem that we had at that time, gosh, I put so many examples, but the problem we had at that time was that we had to implement technology. And it's not like now where people are used to technology, even
Yes.
though some people are still rubbish. Back then, so in the late 90s, people kind of had PCs and they kind of used word processors, but not really.
Yeah.
And our job was to replace paper-based systems with technology in 3 years, 3.5 years. And so what we decided to do really on, and I was one of a few project managers, and we were leading project teams on a multitude of sites in the UK. My boss, I had a really great boss, and he helped me with the team building side of things. He was the person who said to me, because I was managing software engineers, people who are quite different from me in personality. And he said, when it comes to building a team, you need to take time to build a team before you do the work. He was
Nice.
like, the team will only ever perform if they feel like they're a team before you start the work. And so I learned a lot from him in those early days. But he said the same is also true when we're working with people. He said a lot of people don't want what we're implementing
Mm.
because they see it as a threat, which it rightly was. And the
Yes.
organization made loads of people redundant in the same way that AI will make loads of
Yep.
people redundant, right? He said people don't want. He said, so what you've got to do if we want to work cohesively with them, we've got to go in as a team.
Yeah.
Then we've got to build a team with them in order to work together. And the
Nice.
first time we tried it was really tough because we'd never worked in that way before. And very few organizations still work in this way, which is why I teach it. And people are like, oh, this is amazing. I'm like, I know, I've been doing it for 30 years.
Love it.
For me, collaboration only works when there's a team first, and then you work on something together. And that just means that problem solving becomes much, much easier because you're already a team.
Yes.
Otherwise, what you end up doing is bringing a group of individuals together who are each bringing their own, like I said before, biases. They're each bringing their own desires, their wants, their needs into the conversation. And you never actually perform as a team, and you never get to the point where you've got collaboration. And collaboration is really working together to generate forward momentum. And so, I learned so much back in the late 90s of actually building the team first, because when you build the team first, you get the collaboration. But of course, what this requires is that we teach people how to build teams, which we still don't do. We still put the emphasis on leadership development programs for a special few people rather than creating layers of great managers who've got the skills to build really great teams. So I think, that was my favorite personal example is where we actually took the time to build the teams. And of course, the end of that story is all of those implementations went exactly as planned. We got all of those systems in place by December the 31st, 1999. And then I got very drunk on New Year's Eve.
I have in my brain the Prince song of 1999 or whatever
Oh
it was.
yeah, there was a lot of that. Yeah. Disco 2000 by Pulp, because getting drunk on music is a very British thing to do.
Yes.
And Disco 2000 by Pulp was very much the song for that particular time. Yeah.
Love it. So then it leads me to the next question, which is anything else you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers that would include any helpful resources that would help them to think better and differently about collaboration and problem solving? And feel free to promote your books too.
Oh yes, they're the only things I'm going to promote. I'm just going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about my own work. So I mentioned Sakichi Toyoda's work on the 5 whys. I really urge people. It's such a simple exercise for problem solving, and you can use it on anything, absolutely anything. So I would urge people to go and just go on YouTube and watch somebody do the 5 whys. It's really, really simple. I think when it comes to day-to-day problem solving, there's very much a process that people need to follow that starts with problem definition. So you've got problem definition, option evaluation, decision and implementation, kind of in those body, as I like to call it. So, but the most of the time needs to be spent on problem definition. Too often, most of the time is spent on option evaluation. When I worked in government for a long time, they would write papers and pages and pages and pages on the option evaluation, wouldn't even solve the actual problem that we had. Yeah. So I think, really think about those for me as a resource, the 5 whys, and also understanding problem definition, option evaluation, decision implementation needs to be relatively swift if you're actually going to solve a problem. For my own work, when I started working for myself, Danette, which is 10 years ago now, I saw it as I felt like I had a responsibility to make culture accessible. I still think there's this sense that it's too hard. It's really not. Anything's too hard if you're not taught how to do it. Totally. So culture, when I wrote Culture Fix, I really wanted to break down the elements of culture, of which collaboration is a core, one of the 6 pillars of great workplace culture. So Culture Fix is for me is a really great resource that people can go and read. It gives you that insight into culture. And of course, if anybody's interested in actually training their managers on how to be really, really, really great managers, then I've got plenty of courses that I offer in that space too. But the last thing I'll say is there's plenty to be learned from the people around you and from podcasts and from. I don't think enough time people make time for personal development outside that's offered by the organization. Now, many people will say they don't have time. Yeah, I'd argue that's not true. Unless you've got really young kids, in which
Yeah.
case I know that that's true because you have no time when you have young kids. But our attention is drained by so many rubbish things these days.
Yes.
Just by directing it into something that can really help you, can give you a leg up.
Yeah. Colin, have you read Slow Productivity by Cal Newport?
Danette, the weirdest thing, right? So somebody recommended it to me 2 weeks ago. Someone recommended it to me last week, and I've seen it mentioned twice recently. So I should read it, I suppose.
It's
No, I will
great.
read it. But my friend and Digby Scott in
Yes.
New Zealand has been writing something similar. But I will go and read Cal's book. I take it
Yep.
it's good then.
Yeah. So, and
Yeah.
it's to that heart of how do we do great work? And it's not by being really busy, it's by carving out that space to do
Yeah.
the beautiful deep work which you've been talking about. And so it's just another way of looking at the world. And I loved Cal's work because the first book I saw of his was A World Without Email. And I was like, I just love the title of that book. So I was like, that's fabulous. Now, I have to say, I was going to say your
Yeah.
book, Culture Fix, I bought that years and years ago, and it is one of my go-to books. So for my
Thank you,
listeners and
Danette.
viewers, it is definitely worth getting that for your resources too. What were you
I
going to
just, I
say?
just want, yeah, I was just going to mention the world without email, the slow
Yep.
productivity. I think there's still a lot of people that read these books and read the titles, oh, world without email. I just want to let you know, all of this is possible.
Yeah.
You just have to make different choices. And you might think that it's hard. It's really not. So I made a career out of pushing back against dumb cultural norms, not the good ones. The good ones we
Yep.
kept, right? And I
Yes.
wasn't a maverick in the sense that I did things that were anti-cultural. I did not countercultural.
Yes.
Actually, what the things that I did were countercultural in the sense that I rejected 30-minute and 60-minute meetings.
Yes.
I stopped copying people onto it. I wouldn't use blind copy. And then me and my
Nice.
team, we would make decisions on the things that we would do differently. These are the things that make a difference, not only to your lives, but to the lives of people around you. And
Yeah.
so I would really urge people not to get drawn into the trap of just doing what everybody else does, because that's what we do around here.
Yeah.
Really find ways to get time back in your day to free up the opportunity to think. It's
Yes.
possible to do that. Don't let anybody tell you that it's not.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Mm.
And that definitely is something that is a message that I hope our viewers and our listeners take away, because we can either keep doing the busy being busy and feeling frustrated, or we can actually take some space and have more of a positive impact, I would like to say. So, Colin, if any of our listeners or viewers would like to reach out to you, where are the best places for them to do that?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, Danette. So you can find me if you just search for Colin D. Ellis. You can find me on LinkedIn. My website is colindellis.com. I'm on YouTube, Colin D. Ellis everywhere, Instagram, everywhere, just to make it easy for everybody. But I like to try and write things and record things that can help people in the minute, in the moment, Danette. So they can find me all over those places.
Nice. And I just wanted to check in, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers before we finish up?
Well, I've got a new book coming out in August, Danette. I should totally talk about it. Although
Yes,
it's only out in the UK in August. I think it's Australia in December. Anyway, what a
that's okay.
countdown for people that is. But no, other than, you are in control of your own destiny. I think that when it comes to collaboration, people forget what you said, they'll forget your technical knowledge, but they'll never forget how you made them feel or how you made each other feel, and really putting the time, thought, and effort into creating a great team before you start working on anything is the difference between success and failure.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much, Colin. It's been great to catch up, and I'm just going to do a hug before we say to our listeners and viewers, have a wonderful week and keep being adaptable.
All right, Danette, what a great conversation with Colin. Always good to catch up with him. He's always such great value, as I mentioned before. I guess now you had that conversation with him, and my question to you is sort of, what were your key takeaways from that conversation with Colin?
So I really loved the bit about we need to teach managers to be able to create good teams. Before we go anywhere near collaboration, it's actually skills that we need to teach managers to bring the teams together before we start the collaboration. So I love that insight. I did love the bit about when silos work really well, which is obviously when we do that deep work. And I also love the idea that they are actually sometimes just a symptom of the fact that the culture's not quite working so well together. So I really enjoyed that. Love the fact that when he was talking about culture, that collaboration is one of his 6 pillars of collaboration as well. And I just loved his stories and his shares around how we do this much better. So how about you, Jez?
Yeah, I mean, I took away a lot from this. There's some things that, were classic lessons that I hadn't really thought of before, like people remember how you made them feel more than, what you sort of did as work. And another interesting insight I thought that was good was that he said how you work is increasingly dictated by you, which is true for people as they progress in their career and also just with the advent of technology. So I liked that one. And then, as I mentioned before, the 5 whys, as I mentioned prior to the conversation with Colin, yes. Really good question. And it's what I like about it is it's one of these things that's extremely practical where you can use it for your own life at any point. There's always a time where you can use that one. So it's like almost overly practical. So I wanted to thank Colin for that insight as well. I know it's not his, but he brought it to me. So I want to thank him for that. So Danette, did you have any other final things to say about the conversation with Colin?
I think that just the insights that he shared, the fact that if you are seeing silos, that there is a broken part of your culture. But I really love the point about let's bring the team together first and make that cohesive so we know what is it we're actually collaborating. Are we collaborating on the right thing? And not use, if we see a silo, not use it as let's blame, let's get curious to allow us to bring those voices in to be able to adapt better and collaborate, obviously, and problem solve.
No problem. Thank you, Danette. Now, of course, we have to check in on our listeners here, and we've got a listener question this week. It's one of our favourite segments. We love when people write in.
We do.
So we've got a listener question, and so we'd like to reach out. If you've got any questions, feel free to email us at adaptwithdanette@gmail.com or on YouTube. Or you can also write in Spotify. There's a little section for comments. So all these options to reach out to us, we love all of them. We have been really enjoying people who've been reaching out on YouTube. That's been a really easy way to get in contact with us and some really helpful insights from people there. But this one we've actually got from Ahmed, Danette. So this is Ahmed's question. And here's what he says. Hey, Danette, loving the podcast. I'm about 9 months into a job in marketing and I've been put in a job that indirectly needs me to lead some of my team members. I'm the liaison between the clients and the company, and sometimes that means I need to be a leader when deadlines are tight. My style has been a bit more passive as I want to be on the good side of the team, but it's having a knock-on effect where now the clients don't seem happy. What are some good leadership skills I should work on to be a bit better? Thanks again, Ahmed.
Great question, Ahmed, and congratulations on stepping up into leadership. So one of the first things I always say to my leaders, and particularly new leaders, is you're not always going to be liked. So part of our growth is getting used to the fact that sometimes we're going to have to be maybe a little bit firmer, and maybe firm is not the right word, but it's helping people to step up and take accountability for what they need to do. So things like delivering things on time is really important. An emotional intelligence skill, which is one of the skills that we need as adaptable leaders, is to be able to be straightforward. And a lot of people don't like that because they worry if I'm straightforward with another person, that I might upset them and they may not like me, because they interpret straightforwardness as being direct, but they think it's not respectful. And actually, my definition of being straightforward is to say that you can be direct with another person and also respectful. So I love the phrase, and this came from Dan Pink, who has a thing called the Pink Cast. If you don't get that email, I highly recommend it. He does 1-2-minute videos explaining a concept, and they're really good. But he talked in one about stating your intention. So as a leader, when you're having to have a conversation with, say, a team member who's currently not delivering on time when they've agreed to, it could be, hey, my intent around having this conversation is I can see that there is more potential for you to do great work here. One of the areas that's tripping that up at the moment is that you agree to deliver things on time and that hasn't been happening. And I'm probably assuming that you don't know that then has had a flow-on effect to how our customers are perceiving us. Could we have a conversation about how we make sure that that is delivered in a timely manner? And notice my voice is really calm. I've stated the intention. The moment you state your intention and you've got a bit of trust, coming back to Colin's thing about how important it is to build the team first, what that does is calm the team member's brain down, which means they're more likely to take notice of what you're saying rather than feel threatened and react to what you're saying. So I think thinking about the key areas where you can give your team, feedback so that they can get better. Not saying that they're fully, deficient or anything like that, but just to say, hey, I know that you've got more potential and that you could do this, and this is just an area that maybe at the moment you're not necessarily focusing on. And I think they're sort of the main ones. I think also as a leader, thinking about the purpose behind what you do and why you do it, and sharing that with your team as well. Again, because when we've got a strong why, it becomes much easier to become focused on what helps us get there faster. So they're some of my suggestions for Ahmed. Feel free, Ahmed, if you've got more questions once you implement them, to come back to us as well. Thank you.
I have to say I empathise a lot with Ahmed. I've had this exact same experience. I was an account manager and I didn't have very much training, so I have run into this exact same problem, Ahmed. So it's a common problem, but it's a good thing you've got Danette here as well. I'm just trying to think if I had any tips from when I was doing it. I think the only thing that I would say that really helped, and this was something that helped the team aspect, not necessarily any of the other things, but it was doing things with the team outside of work, because it showed that when I did come to them with other things, it was an easier way to heal things, and also it showed that I wasn't coming from a place of malice. This is just my job. So I think that would be my only tip. But otherwise, I think you're doing a great job, Ahmed, and you're thinking about things. You want everybody to be happy, so in your heart, you're feeling like someone who should be a good leader. Just like what Danette said, I think implement some of those good leadership skills. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Danette. Now, Danette, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation with Colin Ellis around how good work cultures make you adaptable, or anything else from our conversation?
So culture, a lot of organisations think it's, there's a culture team or whatever. We're all in charge of culture. And so when we look at how do we build better teams, how do we deal where we can see that there is broken bits of the culture, again, not in a way to make people feel bad, but how do we just improve this? Each of us is part of that culture. So if we walk past something that's not working in a culture, that's going to make us less adaptable. And if we encourage the good parts of culture, that definitely makes us more adaptable. So I love this conversation, Jez. It was so good. Thank you.
That's all right. And for people that have been listening and loving this is, of course, the companion podcast to The Adaptable Leader, 7 skills you need to help you succeed during uncertainty. The world is becoming more uncertain by the day, so this is an absolutely vital bit to keep in your toolkit. So this is obviously, this season, as you mentioned, we're talking about problem solving and collaboration, but that's just 2 letters in your accepts model, so people can really go through the book and learn a lot more about adaptability. To everybody that's been listening and sharing, thank you very much. And Danette,
everyone, stay adaptable.